my pleasure to welcome you to the Sheldon for this installment of the Sheldon Online Academy. I'd like to deal in this segment with the issue of interpretation. As a pianist who plays what we call classical music, I feel that I'm an advocate of the composer. Now, we could look at the musical text and say, well, this is a set of instructions. All these notes, rhythms, dynamics, even expressive markings like slurs, they're all prescribed by the composer. So in a sense, we might feel, well, we're in a straitjacket when we play classical music. But I think if you adopt the standpoint that you're really an advocate for the composer, you're actually taking these symbols on the page, translating them into sound, which is architecture and time, and presenting that, sharing that almost like a tour guide for the audience. I find that it's a much more dynamic outlook. Your role is much more active as a performer, and in some ways it can be more gratifying. So I'd like to use a couple of pieces as a prism through which to view this issue of interpretation. I'd like to start with a late piano piece of Brahms, the Intermezzo, very tender piece, Opus 118, number 2. It begins with a phrase which is in a structure we shall call sentence. The reason I call it a sentence, and I refer to structure here, it's important that we take account of the whole piece here, but I'm looking at this size in music, which is, we call a phrase. It's a 4-bar unit, which is coherent. It's made up of one subunit of a bar, another bar, same rhythm, now a longer unit. And that particular structure, which recurs very frequently actually in music literature, is often called a sentence. So thinking about the phrase as a whole unit like this helps you to create organic shapes in time. Now, a composer like Brahms very often likes to use his musical motives, his melodic fragments, as well as other ideas in multiple ways in a piece. And so there is a wonderful moment when there's a tender kind of closing moment at the beginning of the first section of this piece, which sounds like this. Phrase feels a lot like the first phrase, doesn't it? It's because of the rhythm, but it also actually is the melody is an inversion, or it's upside down from the first melody. And I think being conscious of that enables one as an interpreter to decide, well, this is dolce, which means sweet, but I still need to present that melody in stark contrast to the rest of the texture. So that's an interpretive decision I make for the sake of coherence. Now, the middle section of this piece is involved with this idea of canon. It's an old idea. We see it listed. So we've all participated in this round. Well, it's also called a canon, after the Latin word for rule. Now, Brahms does that loosely between the soprano voice and the tenor voice in the middle section. So it's kind of an incomplete canon. He also actually does that in the middle episode, in this middle section, in more of a hymnal capacity. But as an interpreter, I like to point up the canon by, he gives a repeat in this section, so I like to tenor voice the second time, and that enables the listener to really understand, oh yes, Brahms is doing canon here. And there are other moments in the piece where canon could be implied, even in the outer section. So composers like Brahms will very often unify their works in various subtle ways. It's important to look at the entire structure of the piece, certainly to consider phrasing when interpreting, but harmonic structure absolutely of vital importance to the expressive content of music, and I urge that you consider adopting this attitude that you're the composer's representative, and that you're the carrier of a very powerful message that's embedded in these symbols, and not merely a servant, the slave of actually executing them at the piano. Enjoy your playing.